Welcome back to another Mackem in the Middle podcast. It's been a while, and that's probably a good thing as a Sunderland fan. But Saturday, league action is back, and we do face Ipswich at home, which will be possibly a decisive fixture for many reasons. And I'm joined by someone that you will know as the Kit Factor on Twitter, and he is an Ipswich fan. And there's no international break for you this weekend, which I'm not sure whether you would class that as a blessing or not. I'm not actually sure what the opposite of a blessing is.
We were okay. We weren't actually affected in the end. Selena dropped out of the Kosovo squad, so we were sort of full strength. I mean, Morsey has been called up, I think, in the past for Egypt, and Bon, I think, keeps getting called up by Zimbabwe and then not playing. So we were, full strength yesterday. There were no real excuses other than injuries. So yeah, I mean, in the past we've had games that have gone ahead with two or three, players that we've decided to go ahead with, despite them being away on international duty. But yeah, no excuses from us yesterday.
Yeah. And I mean, I suppose it's not too much of an issue for you now, but I know not just Sunderland fans, but I think there's, I didn't have a look at the fixtures yesterday, but I think there was quite a lot postponed. It surely has to get to a point where League One just automatically gets postponed for international fixtures.
Yeah, possibly, but I think it's probably only a matter of time. Looking at the way that the sort of international players in England have developed over the last 25 years, I suppose you can make a case in 5-10 years that you'll have a fair few, sort of Zambia internationals or whatever playing in League Two and stuff. So I suppose it'll only be the same situation. So I guess as long as I think it was sort of 6 games or something that went ahead yesterday, wasn't it? So I suppose until it becomes a point where it overtakes the norm, and I seem to remember previous seasons where we've had games called off for internationals that there were only like 2 or 3 games called off. We always were one of the few teams that had a game in hand. So I suppose, looking at it without the stats in front of me, yesterday seemed a bit of an anomaly in terms of there seemed to be an unusually high number of teams that had matches called off. So I don't suppose the powers that be at the Football League will see that as too much of a pressing issue at the moment. They don't tend to deal with any of the real pressing issues in a hurry, do they? So I can't imagine, Oxford or Fleetwood having a couple of players away on under 21 duty is going to bother them too much.
Yeah, they don't deal with much at all in general, do they?
No.
But it was, I think, fair to say it's been an interesting start of the season for Ipswich. I think it's probably the best way of putting it. You have picked up recently, and are now just 2 places behind us in League One, as we are 7th and you are 9th, albeit with 2 games extra played. It was a difficult time at the start of the season, wasn't it? And I suppose there's many factors behind that.
Yeah, I mean, I think to be honest, the situation could have been worse. I mean, it's one of those where you look at the fixture list and on paper it looks as easy a run of fixtures as you could hope for, really. I mean, obviously we opened at home to Morecambe. We travelled to Cheltenham. In the third game we'd been away at Burton, who albeit were very decent towards the end of last season, but there were no Sheffield Wednesdays or Sunderlands or Portsmouths or Oxfords or the teams that necessarily would have been expected to be up there. So I think we expected maybe a little bit of difficulty in terms of the cohesion with the massive overhaul in the squad. And I know people go on about the fact that Wigan had 18 new players and other teams had a lot of new players and stuff as well. I think that the difference for us was not just that there's a massive overhaul in terms of the squad, but even the style as well. I mean, it's been really weird, and it's quite hard to explain to kind of outsiders what's been happening at the club over the last year without sort of going into incredible depth. But the problem that I think Cook had early when he took over sort of February, March time last year is that not long afterwards, the kind of takeover went through, and it was quite clear at that stage that we were going to be incredibly well funded, and it was almost a case of it became like Football Manager or FIFA or whatever, where you kind of sit down and Cook must have looked at it and just said, there is literally nobody in this squad that I'm worried about keeping. There were probably 2 or 3 players that were potentially championship level, and beyond that, there were a lot of players that when we went down were like, we're going to tear up League One with these players that just hadn't produced. So I mean, the difficulty that Cook had is towards maybe the last 10 games last season when record was really poor. It was something like 3 wins, 4 draws, 3 defeats or something. Nowhere near the sort of form you'd expect from even the players we had available then, or so we thought. The issue was that the majority of them knew they were on their way in the summer, and especially the games last year when we let him free at Wimbledon and Northampton. when you look back at the highlights, there's not a single player making a challenge. There's literally nothing going on. I don't want to cast aspersions on anyone's professionalism because, at the end of the day, it could have been confidence, could be anything. But that looks very much like a team of players that didn't want to get injured because they were out of contract at the end of the season, and they didn't want to risk their chances, especially post-COVID with, maybe clubs tightening the belts a bit and having smaller squads. But we were just going through the motions, and at that stage we were still like 6th, 7th, 8th, very much in a shout of the playoffs. But a lot of people use that at the start of the season as kind of Cook's overall record. As soon as we started the season with 3 draws and 3 defeats, it was all, Cook out and he needs to go and blah, blah, blah. And the first 6 games were like a breath of fresh air. The actual football we were playing was brilliant. Yeah, we were shipping in loads of goals, but we were scoring loads as well. And, compared to last year with Lambert, where we were taking 78 minutes to have a shot or a shot on target, all of a sudden we're drawing 2-2, or we're sort of losing 3-2, or these matches suddenly were entertaining, chances galore, end to end, and it was just individual mistakes. A lot of the players that we'd brought in, we still weren't sure that the transfer business was done until whatever the end of August was, 5th, 6th game.
Yeah.
And even then, Morsey came in, Selena came in, so we still hadn't really got a settled side. So I think what's been shown over the last, I think it's now 14 games, is we've won 7, drawn 5, and lost 2, which is obviously a massive improvement. At one point, we'd won 7 out of 11. So, kind of opposite to Sunderland in that respect. It's almost been a kind of mirror of your start, isn't it? In terms of, you got off to all these wins, in a row, and now it's sort of draws and defeats. So I think from
Many
our point of
defeats.
view, yeah, it looks good now. I mean, I think yesterday was a kind of we didn't really turn up, and it's hard to know, sort of how much of sort of what the normal Oxford was there as well, because it just descended into a bit of a farce after about 60 minutes when they had clearly settled for a point, and before that they were probably the best team I'd seen down here in terms of moving the ball and stuff. So it's a bit of a surprise they resorted to that. But from our point of view, now that the players have settled, we're getting a bit of an idea of what partnerships work. The system's settled, the style of play settled. It's now starting to look pretty good, albeit there's still sort of few concerns that need to be addressed.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the Ipswich squad as well, I think obviously football's not played on paper, but on paper it's probably one of the better squads in the league. Certainly better than some of them that are probably in the top 6 right now. Does that somewhat change your perception on what you would expect this season, or is it still, aim for the playoffs, considering that, I'm not entirely sure how many you brought in, you'll be able to tell me, but I think it was like 22 players or something I think you signed?
It was, I think 19 was the sort of official counter. That's the as of the end of the transfer window. I think Selena and Morsey were 18 and 19. So yeah, I mean, I think it would do. I think ordinarily, if we'd have started, it got to July and all the players are in the building, and we'd had a chance to work on it in pre-season, I think there's absolutely no excuse really for arguing we should be in the top 2. I think when you look at the players that we've had on the bench, people like Connor Chaplin, who was playing regularly for, I think it was 33 starts or something for Barnsley last year as they got in the playoffs in the Championship. You got Sam Morsey who's come in, who was one of the better players in a very good Championship side. So we've got a bench now where arguably all 7 of the players on the bench would have been the first 7 names on last year's team sheet, and last year we were deemed to have one of the best squads in the division. So it's almost like kind of Harlem Globetrotters in terms of the talent that we've got in the squad on an individual basis is absolutely outrageous for this level. It's just a case of quite simply we had that bad start and immediately we're sort of 10-12 points behind Wigan and Plymouth and some of those other teams. So I think with the squad we've got, there's absolutely no excuse for not finishing in the top 6. What just concerns me now is obviously a third of the way through the season or whatever we are now, we're got a lot of ground to make up, and I think even if we hit the sort of 2 points per game marker that would normally get you in the sort of playoffs, I think we still probably end up on like 82, 84 points or whatever, where we always see this team's on sort of 92, 90, 88 points or whatever. So I think it's going to be very difficult to catch up. I suppose the only hope, and it's probably doing a disservice to the likes of Plymouth, is that they weren't one of the teams that were up there that were fancied. So maybe when the sort of everything hits and injuries and the run of fixtures and stuff, they drop off a little bit. But we've said that about Wickham a few years ago, haven't we? We've said that about the likes of Blackpool and teams like that. Burton, a few years back when they got promoted to the Championships, and some of these teams just don't have that run. They're up there because they're very good. They're very well coached. They've got a decent squad of players that are emerging, and maybe not kind of household names at that level. So there's every chance that ultimately they'll stay up there. And for me, I think Wigan and Rotherham look incredibly strong, and they're the two I think would probably at this stage be my two favourites to go up automatically.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that I want to say Sunderland fans were optimistic about, that's certainly changed in the last few weeks. But if you look at the likes of Plymouth and you look at the likes of Wigan and you look at the squad kind of in depth, and then you compare it to a Sunderland or an Ipswich, if either of Ipswich or Sunderland get injuries, they've got players that can come in and replace them, and not just replace them, but play a part in the team as well. Just looking at the team that you had against Oxford, you had players like Scott Fraser on the bench who would probably start for any other team in the league. Joe Pigott, one of the top goal scorers last season in the league. Do you think that will play a pivotal part this season? Again, not just for Ipswich, but for the likes of Sunderland and other clubs like that as well, where they do have a lot of squad depth as well, and probably I'm not too clued up on Plymouth squad, but I can't imagine they have the similar depth that other teams do.
I think it probably will. It's just a case of to what effect. I've thought this is the third year that we've been down at this level, and the first and second seasons, I probably naively assumed that was the case as well. With the squad we've got, but I think that there seems to be a very very small margin on any particular day between the top teams and the bottom sides. And I know we say this about the Championship and League One and League Two, and I think it's only really the Premiership where that doesn't apply. You never really. I know Palace obviously upset Man City a few weeks ago, but you never really see the kind of worst teams upset the top teams on a regular basis. It's more a kind of once in a blue moon thing, isn't it? But I think what's always got me is that I think when you're sort of, as it's always promoted with the the sort of extra midweek games from 46 fixtures as opposed to 38. It's always, this kind of Tuesday, Saturday that gets built up. I think if teams go out of the cup competitions early enough, which inevitably happens to sort of half the teams at this level, I don't feel like they really drop off too much over the course of the season. I think, we've seen it with some of the teams that have been involved in cup matches and some of the ones with really paper thin squads. But I think for me, if you've got a team like a Plymouth, that are up there and they're firing, or sort of Blackpool towards the end of last season, it almost feels like if you get one or two players out, and even if it's a youth player that comes in, because the rest of the team is, is flying, that just seems to lift them to the same sort of level. And I think the kind of counter to that argument is on Tuesday we played Colchester at home in the Pizza Trophy. And as you say, the team that we put out was, good enough to probably be considered a top six side in League One. I mean, as you say, we started with Pigott up front, Chaplin. We had Fraser. All these players that we'd signed and potentially were going to be in our best 11, and we were able to bring an entire new 11 in. And we played all right, but we were against a team that's, I know it's a derby for them, and Colchester kind of absolutely hate us, and we're not really that fussed about them at all, because of we've always had the rival with Norwich. So
Middlesbrough comes to mind for Sunderland.
they lifted their game, and they do have a lot of ex-Ipswich players as well. And in fairness, I don't think any of those played particularly great. They played okay, but we drew 0-0. We beat them on penalties, but we just kind of almost kind of dropped to our level, rolling up and expecting to kind of win. And I always feel like that's the opposite when you get teams that flying at the league. When they you see they got 3, 4, 5 players out and they're big players. I don't really feel like, unless it's a goal scorer, somebody like when obviously Grigg, for Wigan a few years back, when he just seemed to be involved in everything, and same with White for yourselves last season. Unless it's a kind of really consistent score, and I think we'd be the same with Bomb, because Pigott is clearly a very very good player, but he just hasn't really clicked yet for us. He's had very very few appearances and limited chances. Like he got 2 minutes off the bench yesterday, for example, and that's just down to how well Bond's been doing, but. It just kind of feels to me, unless it's a goal scorer, when these teams do have players out injured, they don't necessarily drop off, because I just think the rest of the team is so settled and so much confidence that it kind of just lifts and elevates those other players to a kind of similar standard.
Yeah, and I think one of the main talking points, especially for Sunderland now, and probably for Ipswich a few weeks ago is down to the manager, or the head coach for Sunderland. I'm sure you've seen it, and I'm sure you've been enjoying it. All the ideas about Johnson leaving or going, and who would come in replacement at Sunderland after, I think that's 5 defeats from our last 6 games in all competitions, and I think that one that we didn't lose, we drew after 90 minutes. Unironically, down to a shocking refereeing decision as well, but we'll forget about that. But from a Sunderland point of view, it's just strange. You know, they've started the season very well, probably better than we expected to, considering, you know, we had a large turnover of players as well, a lot of young players coming in that had never played senior football before, and then just it all went downhill. And like you've said earlier, it's the complete opposite Ipswich, who started poorly. You know, the team gradually gelled together, and, you know, getting the results yesterday aside. But there was questions asked of Paul Cook a few weeks ago, or maybe a month ago. Where did you kind of stand on that at the time?
I think it's always dangerous speaking for a fan base, isn't it? Because you've got, you know, elements that know what they're talking about, elements that don't. You know, you've got the people that react, you know, after one defeat and want the manager called out, and the ones that get carried away with one good result and stuff. I think predominantly I'd say most Ipswich fans you know, the little run we went on were optimistic. You know, a lot of us had seen what Cook had done at, you know, at Sligo, Chesterfield, you know, Portsmouth, Wigan, as a very good manager. Certainly, he talked the talk, because even last season when he came in, immediately in the post match press conferences, he was saying what everybody was thinking. You know, before you'd got Lambert turning around, you know, just the usual cliches. We did really well. The guys, you know, gave all their effort. You know, just nonsense. You know, we could have come off a 5-0 drubbing to a non-league team, and it would be about how good the players were and how hard they'd tried and all this nonsense. So Cook came in. I think the first thing you want is that he clearly recognises the issues, because you're like, okay, that gives us a bit of a chance of fixing them. You know, if he doesn't see them, then, you know, we're in even more trouble. So I think really after the, you know, the bad run with the style of play, with the new ownership, with the turnover of players, I think most of us were at the stage where we were still reasonably confident that we'd turn round. But I think he was being judged at that stage probably against, as you allude to with the squad, the expectations about what this squad should achieve over the course of the
Yeah.
season, and a lot of the mitigating factors, you know, the fact we were still bringing players in, and you know, sort of late into August, and you know, the fact some players like Chaplin, for example. I mean, Aluko got absolutely ridiculed on his debut. I think it was Newport at home in the cup. You know, the first half an hour, every time he tried to trap the ball, it was just going under his foot. You know, a couple of weeks ago at Cambridge, he was absolutely sensational, and all of a sudden, people were talking about Wes Burns, who'd been brilliant, you know, in the first 10 games of the season. You know, maybe not being able to get back in the team because Luco was playing so well, and we've had the same with, you know, Fraser when he's, you know, started off the season, he's kind of dropped out, and Edwards has come in, and Celine has come in, and but various players, and you know, this kind of stuff. So I think most of us were, you know, kind of cautiously optimistic, but the first few kind of concerns were just creeping in, largely to do with the fact that we didn't seem to be learning our lessons. I think, you know, the main thing that worried me was when Cook came out and kind of, you know, said that he wouldn't change his strategy, you know, even in the last minute if we were 2-1 up or whatever, because we'd let a goal in the last minute against Wimbledon. You know, we'd let goals slip twice against MK Dons when we were up, and we'd given silly goals away. You know, it just seemed to be a pattern of conceding goals just before half time and just before full time. You know, Cambridge was another one. We were 2-1 up, and they equalised in the 90th minute. And Cook kind of came out and was like, "Well, I'm not going to, you know, chuck an extra defender on," and so on. And then, you know, the next game we were 2-1 up in, I think, in the last minute, and he brought Callum Burgess on as an extra defender, and we sort of thought, okay, well, he said that, but he's clearly done, you know, what you'd do in that bit. I don't think there's any problem in the last couple of minutes recognising they're going to throw long balls at you, and they're going to go direct and bring in somebody on to deal with that. And we kind of saw the match out. So I think the turning point for a lot of people was the Wycombe result. You know, first 15 minutes we were atrocious. You know, I was one of the few that made the trip, and it just looked like we were going to get battered. You know, Vokes and Co were just every single ball that was being pumped forward, and then weirdly Coulson gets injured, goes off, Burgess comes on at left back, and that diagonal ball, you know, sort of wasn't on anymore. And then from there we grew. I mean, we had a first shot on about half an hour, whenever it was, that Selena scored, and from that point on we were just absolutely superb. You know, defensively we were outstanding, and just going forward we just looked like scoring every time we went forward. And I think that was the kind of main turning point for a lot of the fans that were on the fence, to kind of go, well, we've now won 7 out of 11. We've just gone and hammered Portsmouth 4-0 away. We've gone and hammered Wycombe 4-1 away. we now look like a really, really, really good team capable of smashing anybody. And I think we've still got inconsistencies. There are still issues, and I think that there will still be people that one bad result would have turned on Cook yesterday had we lost and said, well, we can't beat the top teams consistently. That's the sort of game we need to be winning if we want to go up and all this nonsense. But I think generally the trend is an upward one. I think with the football's entertaining. The players we've got are sort of growing into the system, and at the moment I wouldn't be able to see us outside the top six come the end of May. But I think there's a lot of people that still wouldn't be good enough. It still needs to be top two. Otherwise, Cook's failed with the squad that he's got.
Yeah. I'm just going to go back to a point that you made at the start of that about kind of what Paul Cook achieved at Wigan. Obviously, got them promoted, got them playing good football. And then you look at Lee Johnson, who spent a long time at Bristol City and did an okay job, but never got them that into that kind of top level of the league, never got them promoted, always seemed to drop off at some point in the season. And, I haven't looked too much into his history at the other clubs he's managed, but I'm not entirely sure if he's won promotions there either. But how much does a manager's past reputation kind of play in the sense of optimism? If Paul Cook's been in this league, he's got promoted from this league, he's got you playing good football in this league. And on the other hand, you've got Johnson, who has a reputation of going on bad runs, which ultimately stops you getting promoted at times in League One. And obviously, every season the league seems to be getting stronger. You've got Sheffield Wednesday now, Rotherham, Wycombe, Sunderland, Ipswich. It's a very strong division this season, and there's very little margin for error. So, does a reputation play into the amount of optimism you have?
I don't know if it does. I mean, I think the way you've got to look at it is, and I always look at, unfortunately, Norwich. How many of their fans would have heard of Daniel Farke when he took over, a few years ago? Yes, it's all well and good having a reputation as being a, coach from Dortmund's under 21s or whatever, but how does that translate into English football? And as much as it pains me to say it, they became a very, very good side, playing very attractive football, scoring lots of goals. And then from that point of view, we'd had Paul Lambert, who had obviously, from our point of view, been probably their most successful manager ever in terms of sort of back-to-back promotions, getting him into the Premier League. He was adored there at one point until it kind of all went sour. But I think the big thing for me with Cook has been a lot of people early in the season when we were struggling to win a game and Wigan were up at the top of the table had turned around and said how much is down to Liam Richardson because he'd always been his assistant at Chesterfield, Portsmouth, Wigan. Had we got was he the brains of the operation? Because I think a lot of people thought that was this case with Lambert and Culverhouse because I think they had a row at Villa. Culverhouse went and managed elsewhere. And after that, Lambert had gone from, obviously being a sort of very successful manager at Wycombe and Norwich to then having these spells at Stoke and Wolves and Villa that didn't kind of pan out. So I always think you have to look at it from a kind of second circumstance. I mean, how good would Pep be if he went down into League One and took over Accrington or Fleetwood? But I think Keane was the perfect example for me because I think when, and I may have this wrong, but from memory I think you guys lost 4 out of 4 or 3 out of 4 and under Niall Quinn, and then Keane comes in. And it always seemed to me with that squad you had, it was a Premier League squad in the Championship, and it looked like a kind of ridiculous squad. Keane comes in with this massive reputation as being one of the best players of his generation, and all of a sudden you guys are flying up the table and get promoted. And I think when he came into us initially, there was that reputation. I think a lot of people were like, okay, he's going to be brilliant. We've got this new owner, we've got some money, we've got these managers. He's been at one club, got them promoted, from being in the relegation zone. But I really think there's certain managers who's it's almost like they get found out at a point, that they ride the kind of wave of either having a really good squad or a bit of momentum or whatever it is. And I think that works against managers as well. You get some really good managers that go into clubs, and hopefully Dean Smith's one of those ones where I think it's a really decent manager. He now goes into Norwich, and the situation that they're in kind of bogs him down a little bit, and the lack of confidence in the squad or whatever becomes a factor. But I think for me, it's if you're appointing a manager like Cook who's had 3-4 previous clubs and he's improved them all, got them playing good football, got them all promoted, I think that speaks very highly. I think the concern I'd have had as a Sunderland fan, from my point of view with Johnson, is what had he really achieved? He'd done okay, a little cup run with Bristol City, flirting with the playoffs and stuff, but never really achieved anything on the back of what was seen, because we've now got a lot of Bristol City's old sort of staff behind the scenes. We've got their old CEO. fitness coaches, sort of strength and conditioning coaches, all that kind of stuff. And we get a lot of Bristol City fans on our forum, sort of moaning about what they didn't achieve, and sort of how our CEO, who everybody at the moment is madly in love with, and thinks he's done an absolutely amazing job, myself included. There's a lot of negativity from Bristol City fans towards him, that they should have achieved more and stuff. So, when you take that into consideration, if that is correct, then did Johnson achieve much at all, or did he just achieve what he should have done for the the kind of budget he was being given at that time, which was to kind of challenge for the playoffs and above? So I think that's always the sort of concern, isn't it? How much does Johnson have in his locker, in times like this, to kind of draw upon? Because I think someone like Cook, for example, even a McCarthy or a Warnock, or anybody like that, they've seen it, they've done it, they've been at the top end, they've been down the bottom end. They've had players that are confident, they've had injury crises. You kind of think, well, what has Johnson got at this stage to kind of turn it round? And if I was a Sunderland player in that dressing room, I wouldn't see a lot on his CV that would kind of convince me that he could talk my form around, or kind of talk the morale around. But I suppose it just depends on him as a manager. There'll no doubt be players in there that say he's the best manager they've ever worked for, and is a top guy, and all this kind of stuff. So I think you never really see what goes on, because, as we know with Lambert, he talks some absolute nonsense in the press conferences and post match about how great the players have been. But for all we know, he was in there, giving them, sort of both barrels in the dressing room, and telling them how unacceptable it was. So, I mean, you're never really privy to what goes on behind closed doors either, are you? You can only really judge them based on what you see. And sometimes that might be for the players' protection, more than anything.
Yeah. And I think, as a fan, kind of like from an outside view, you look at some of the managers that get sacked, and you either agree with them or you don't agree with them, and you sometimes question why they've been sacked. I always look back at the Farke sacking at Norwich. Norwich had a shocking season, and then they won the first game, and then he gets sacked. Dean Smith as well at Villa. Obviously, they went on a poor run, but he'd achieved quite good things with that squad. And I'm not ashamed to say I did think they would finish top 6 this season. How wrong I was on that. But if Sunderland were to lose on Saturday, and it's a big if, and hopefully not, but if we were to lose on Saturday and Johnson was to go, that would be, I think, 4 league defeats out of the last 5. Would you be surprised as an outsider to see him sacked?
I don't know how much of an outsider I am, because I've got so many Twitter followers that are Sunderland fans, so I see so much hatred towards Johnson, even if it's a very small percentage of your fan base. That it comes across to me that he's kind of at that stage now where he's sort of walking the tightrope, where I don't think it would surprise anyone if he was given a bit more time, and it wouldn't surprise anyone if he was given the boot either. He does seem to be in that kind of precarious position. And I think any club with the sort of backing that you guys have got, and the fan base you've got, and the expectations you've got, there is, unfortunately, as much as I'm an advocate of giving time, I mean, arguably, if we hadn't given Bobby Robson time, we'd have never been, we'd never had all of the kind of glory days that we had that followed in the next decade or so, when we, bizarrely ended up being one of the best teams in the world. So I think there's always that, but you can give another manager time, and they never achieve anything because they're just not a very good manager. So I think, it's one of those where you are at the moment, slipping out of the playoffs, but being in touch, with those teams, and being in touch, still with the top 2. I don't think it surprises anyone at this stage if Johnson goes, because I think, if it's another defeat to a team that's in and around you as well, it just seems strange that you've had, like, say, such an unbelievable start, where you just seem to be going, sort of picking up 3-4 goals everywhere, and beating everybody that was put before you, to just suddenly not being able to get a point. I don't know exactly how that sort of that switch gets kind of flicked, really, but once it does, it never seems to just sort of immediately go back, does it? So I think history tells us probably if you stick with Johnson, you just sort of start sliding down to 9th, 12th, 14th, or whatever. So again, unless there's extenuating circumstances for the run of form, I don't think anyone would be surprised if he's sort of replaced, especially at the moment with what looks some pretty decent managers that a club of Sunderland could probably attract down to League One at this stage. Whether Wilder or somebody would go, whether again somebody like Farke or so on would be interested. But at the moment, there do seem to be some fairly decent sort of Championship level managers that would probably drop down for a club of Sunderland's size.
I think I would have loved Wilder, but he did go to Middlesbrough, which was quite heartbreaking, to be honest. I think he would have been a perfect manager. I think he was at Sheffield when they got promoted from League One as well, wasn't it? And then
he
went up to
was.
the Premier League.
And like I say, until he went to Middlesbrough, I think he was one of the names I kept seeing bandied about by Sunderland fans as somebody that you'd have loved to have had. So, when there are managers, and like say, I know he's gone to Middlesbrough, but it feels like we're at that time of year where nobody would be surprised now if another reasonable Championship manager or lower end Premier League manager was made available in the coming weeks anyway. So I suppose it's just one of those, isn't it, where. And I think that was what surprised me about Norwich, with them winning at Brentford and Farke then going, you just like, okay, fair enough. They'd already made the decision. They've got somebody lined up to come in. And then when Lampard, turned them down and sort of the rumours that Smith was going to do the same, it just seemed, okay, well, they haven't got anyone lined up. So it seemed a little bit kind of stranger at that point. But I suppose, Sunderland may well have their eye on somebody who's in a job at the moment, but, one or two bad results away from it themselves. So I suppose you never really know. I mean, I've never understood how clubs seem to be reluctant to pay compensation to go and get the manager they want. You'll squander like 5 million on a player or 4 million on a player, and then they won't go and pay £500,000 to get somebody released from their contracts, who ultimately is probably the most important person in the entire squad. And it's like, how often do you see a Sunderland or an Ipswich go out and pay, £1 million or two to say, this is the guy that we want, this is the manager. We don't care if he's in a 4-year deal at Plymouth or, wherever. This is who we want. This is the guy that we kind of think will get us playing the right way, will have success, bring the young players through, whatever objective it is. It just seems bizarre that everyone seems to just wait until there's a manager or two available, without having to pay compensation before they kind of make a move. But there we go.
Yeah. We'll move on to the last thing. I think I said before on Twitter, and I said about Sheffield as well, it's definitely not a League One fixture. It definitely feels, like a Premier League or maybe a top-end Championship fixture.
It might
at
do
worst.
you, because you've been in the Premier League fairly recently to us. It certainly doesn't. But...
We'll go with the Championship fixture.
Yeah.
Stick with that one. But hopefully, I say hopefully, be a close game. And I'd like to think Sunderland can get a win and kind of go back on a run that they did at the start of the season. I'm sure Ipswich will be looking to do the same. So, score predictions. What are you going with?
Well, it depends. I've not seen the referee. That plays a big part.
Davin Drysdale.
Great. You got all the
Potentially.
He's got a bit of a grudge against us from last year. He was the one involved in the Alan Judge debacle.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that.
I can't remember what game it was, but we had him in. It was absolutely shocking as well. Just wanted to be the attention of everything.
Yeah, so I'd like to think that referees are impartial, but we seem to get certain referees that we've had them before, and like the opposition manager's got a yellow or a red card, and a few of their players have given the referee stick, and they turn up down here and they give us every decision, and then vice versa. There's certain referees where we've been chanting about their performance at some point in the second half quite vocally, and they turn up here with almost like an agenda against us. So I think it's just one of those. Is Mr. Drysdale the sort that is going to turn up and have a grudge because of the whole his name being dragged through the mud last year, or will he be extra keen to make sure that he is impartial and doesn't hold a grudge? But no, all joking aside about referees, I think we look hard to beat at the moment. I mean, the Oxford game yesterday, even though we hit the post twice and we probably had 5 of the best 7 or 8 chances. I think that game we lose, if it's a month earlier, earlier in the season, we find a way to make a mistake and to lose that match. So we look really hard to beat at the moment, especially away. I think the problem we've got is against teams that are very, very physical. We still kind of struggle with a little bit, but teams, when Sheffield Wednesday came down here, we were much the better side. When we've played Portsmouth away, I know the Cowleys don't quite play football the same way that Portsmouth fans have been used to under Cook, and even to a sort of slightly lesser degree Jacket. I think it was more the Cowley school, wasn't he, than anything else. I think when teams play, try and play the right way, like Sunderland seem to have done from all the highlights I've seen, they're the teams that we seem to have a fair bit of success against. So normally I'd be fairly negative about it, but I wouldn't be surprised if your form continues, if we come away with a narrow win or sort of entertaining draw. But I think at the moment we're still in that mode where we look like we'll win 3, draw 1 and lose 1 out of every 5 fixtures, and there doesn't seem to be any kind of rhyme or reason as to who we beat and who we lose to. We're still, as I say, dropping points against Cambridge and Morecambe's and Cheltenham's this season, and we've probably been the better team, like I say, against Wickham, who we thrashed, Portsmouth, who we thrashed, Sheffield Wednesday, who we played really well against, MK Dons. I thought we were the better team, even though they knocked the ball around really nicely. They didn't really hurt us and stuff. So we do still seem to do better against the sort of better sides. The case is, are you one of the better sides at the moment, or are you so bad recently that you fall into the sort of team that will cause us difficulty? But I think it's going to be a draw or a 1-goal win either way. I can't see us rocking up and thumping you, and likewise, we don't look like the sort of team to capitulate nowadays either.
Hopefully not. I can't deal with another hammer one. Especially, I couldn't deal with the messages after the game if we did. I'm sure you'd feel the same.
To be fair, I've been fairly well restrained. You were giving it the big and early in the season, and taunting me about our start, and I've been fairly reserved. I've just given you a little bit back of your own medicine over the last few weeks when I've noticed that you've let in 5 at Rotherham or whatever, and we've picked up another 3 points. So I would have remained dignified had you not started the whole situation. And now I think you just deserve everything you get.
It's a fair one. I'll take that. But that is the time we have today. Appreciate you taking the time again to come talk to me.
No, you're welcome.
We'll be back on Sunday to talk about the game. And I'll make sure I mention the DM that I've sent you or received from you. But until then, we will see you later.
That's all, folks.